Washington Journal continues.
Welcome back. We're joined now by Martha Miller, who is the National Security Institute Deputy Executive Director at George Mason University's Law School. Welcome to Washington Journal.
Nice to see you. Thank you.
So first, can you tell us about the National Security Institute, your funding, and any political point of view you all might have?
So we're actually a nonpartisan or bipartisan organization. It was founded in 2017, and it was founded, under the idea of needing a group of policymakers, practitioners who believe that the United States should take a leading role in the world. And we are funded by private foundations. So we take no government money, and our point of view, like I said, is bipartisan. We have actually volunteer fellows. So our fellows are practitioners. They we have both Republicans and Democrats. We have people who have worked for George Bush, for President Biden, for Trump, and Obama.
Well, speaking of former presidents, can you tell us a little bit about your own background? You worked in Bush 43's White House. Can you talk about the capacity you were working in, and if your work involved classified information, which is the topic of discussion this morning?
Sure. So actually, I worked in presidential personnel at the White House. I did have a security clearance. My work at the White House did not include classified information. However, I did work also at the United States Senate at the Foreign Relations Committee. And I did go into SCIF briefings in a secured facility to receive classified briefings. Also at the Political Military Bureau at the Department of State. I worked there for about a year and a half during the Bush administration, actually in the lead up to the Iraq War. And so I did have experience. I had both a classified and an unclassified computer. I had to put my classified hard drive in the safe every night before I went home. So I am familiar with having two different systems to work on.
Okay, so this is obviously in the news because of that signal chat that was written about in The Atlantic magazine. But before we get into the details of that exact chat, can you break down the legal definition of classified information and the different levels of it?
So classified information, this is actually established by executive order. Previously, I think it was, Roosevelt was the first time that we had classified information was established under Franklin Roosevelt. But most, we have had in successive presidencies, it's been established by executive order. The most recent executive order was actually 13-526, and essentially there are various levels of classified information. There is, first and foremost, there's unclassified but sensitive, then there is secret, then there is top secret, and then you get into compartmentalized information where you could have a colleague who doesn't know what you know, and vice versa. So
then, your thoughts on this last week's event, because obviously there's this revelation about the Signal group chat with senior intelligence officials on the U.S. military action in Yemen. And so for folks who may have missed the news, on the day of the attack, March 15th, Defense Secretary Hegseth shared operational details in this chat 2 hours before the strike. What is your take on that situation?
So, in reading the articles about it and the information that I've seen, it looked to me as though Mike Waltz had created the chat for coordinating, ensuring that individuals in the group had seen emails that were sent on the high side, that is classified emails. Which is something that most of us do in our daily lives, is we make sure people have received the information that we know they need to see. But it was not until Secretary Hegseth, it was actually kind of logistical until actually the Vice President started to talk about the policy. And then it was Secretary Hegseth who started sharing operational details to your point, 2 hours prior to the strikes. And to me, this is something that is, we don't know. They say that it's not classified, but There is a process to declassify information and operational details. I think, by and large, pretty much any national security professional you ask would say that that should be classified.
So, can you discuss the use of the app Signal by these high-ranking officials? For folks who aren't familiar, what is this app, and should they have been using it regardless of the content of the conversation?
So, Signal has been an authorized app for setting up meetings for logistical reasons. It is used also by political activists. It's used by journalists. It is used also by our allies, diplomatic corps, when they are coordinating, hey, we're going to meet at this date. Can you confirm that you're coming? That sort of thing. And so I think the way that, aside from erroneously adding a journalist to the chat, I think it would have been okay had it just been to say, hey, you have information you need to review on your classified computer. So I think, so it definitely, is okay for certain things that are unclassified. I think what is concerning is put aside the fact that, Signal is an encrypted app, and so people do trust it as a way to communicate for personal reasons and what I just described. But for, the problem is that foreign adversaries, even if they don't know, even if they can't crack the encrypted code, they know how long, who's in the chat and how long they're speaking and at what time they're speaking. So then they can compare that to other pieces of intelligence they have. Let's say that they also were following the Israelis. And they put two and two together and say something big is happening. They see that the vice president, that the national security advisor, that the SecDef, Secretary of State, that they're all on this chat and actively talking during a certain period of time. That's going to, that's something they'll know, and that will be a piece of information that they can use.
There's been discussion as to whether this Signal leak was a violation of the Espionage Act, which is the reference to the Espionage Act of 1917, which is criminalized unauthorized retention and dissemination of sensitive information that could undermine U.S. national defense or aid a foreign nation. Do you think it was?
I think that this is definitely something that needs to be very seriously reviewed, and it will be, I know, by the Senate Armed Services Committee. They've also asked the Inspector General to launch an investigation. I think that is telling that that the chairman, Republican chairman of the Armed Services Committee in the Senate, has asked for that. Many Republicans have expressed grave concerns. And so, I think intent, number one, is actually relevant. A lot of times, if it's inadvertent, it's harder to prosecute. I think sharing operational details is probably another level of concern that rises, that goes a step beyond mistakenly adding someone, and but that could be construed, however, as gross negligence, right? So we'll see. I mean, I think there will be numerous investigations, and certainly if the House changes in the next election, I think we could see some serious investigations on the House side.
We'll be taking your questions for Martha Miller about the Signal leak and the national security implications of it. Our line for Democrats is 202-748-8000, for Republicans 202-748-8001, and for Independents 202-748-8002. Now, Martha, at a press conference on Thursday, Attorney General Pam Bondi was asked by a reporter if the Department of Justice would investigate the Signal chat case. Here's what she had to say.
In terms of the Signals chat controversy that's going on, is DOJ involved at this point? If so, why? If not, why not?
Well, first, it was sensitive information, not classified, and inadvertently released. And what we should be talking about is it was a very successful mission. Our world is now safer because of that mission. We're not going to comment any further on that. If you want to talk about classified information, talk about what was at Hillary Clinton's home that she was trying to bleach bit, talk about the classified documents in Joe Biden's garage that Hunter Biden had access to. This was not classified information, and we are very pleased with the results of that operation and that the entire world is safer because of it.
What do you think of Attorney General Bondi's response there?
You know, look, I think the Trump administration is disinclined to admit fault. You know, I think Mike Waltz certainly did step forward to say it was his fault for adding a journalist to it. But I think it will require a lot more pressure from frankly from voters to make any shift here. I think it's highly likely that there will be no prosecution. I don't think there will be actual action taken, and I think, you know, ostensibly, even if that were to take place, I think, you know, then you have the presidential pardon, which is feasible, certainly within the realm of possibility as well.
What can we learn from the number and the positions of the people who were in this particular chat? Chief of Staff Susie Wiles, Treasury Secretary Bessent, Joint Chiefs of Staff not involved? What do you think?
You know, I think that they certainly, you know, folks who are on the chat and folks, you know, should raise their hand when they see something that shouldn't be, you know, hey, reminder, we're not on a classified system. Mm-hmm. And then, you know, others, you know, who may not have been in the chat, you know, look, this was not, this was a messy situation. Mm-hmm. Let's just put it that way. And, you know, someone should have checked to see who was in the chat. Someone should have raised their hand when they saw that, you know, hey, stop, did you forget that you're on an unclassified, you know, system?
All right, well, let's get to some questions from our audience. Tom is in Elgin, Illinois, on our line for Republicans. Good morning, Tom.
Yeah, let me mute my TV a second.
Thank you.
I just wanted to say that Mike Waltz is on the Senate. He's on the House Select Intelligence Committee. He's on the Armed Services Personnel Committee. This just stinks like the Defense Department, the CIA. Well, Newt Gingrich said that the executive branch people that come in are just summer help. And these people that are running everything, this looks like a thing to make the Trump administration look inept. Mike Waltz looks like he's part of the deep Washington administration, and it just stinks to high heaven. Anyway, how could a guy that's doing all that, 12 years congressman, and part of all this intelligence, make this mistake? It was a mistake. They're running things. They kill presidents. They make wars. And Trump is up against a huge wall of deep state administration.
Tom, can I, before you go, I just want to make sure that we're clear on your point. Are you saying that you think that this was intentionally done?
How couldn't it be? This guy's part of the Select Intelligence Committee. How can he not know about how to run an intelligence chat? Okay.
Would you like to respond to that?
You know, look, look, we're all human. We all make mistakes. I take your point. You know, yes, how could someone, you know, make that kind of mistake? But mistakes do happen. I think, you know, this is actually, you know, case in point, you know, they are human beings just like, you know, we all are. And so, you know, my sense is it's highly embarrassing for him. He took responsibility for it in the sense that he admitted he shouldn't have done that, that it was reckless. So I I guess I disagree. I don't think it was intentional. I think that he made a mistake that is quite embarrassing.
Rick is in Cotkill, New York, on our line for Independence. Good morning, Rick.
Hi there. I'd just like to say I'm pretty sure that both China and Russia are sending folks over to our country to protect Trump's cabinet, because if there was a problem and it broke out in the world, they would want the current administration in place to handle any issues. They would not want a competent group to maintain and handle any geopolitical problems. They would want the exact group in place, maintaining their current positions and handling any issues that came up militarily. Thank you.
Any response to that?
You know, I don't really have a response to that. I'm not sure what to say.
Okay, well, let's move to Steve in Webster, Massachusetts, on our line for Republicans. Good morning, Steve.
Okay, thanks for taking my call. I did 20 years active duty Army Intel. I worked for the government, blah, blah, blah. I noticed none of the, first thing glaring on Signal, none of this stuff was portion marked. The thing is, has Signal been used before by other entities, governmental entities? And with that, I mean, if this is ubiquitously used, we're going to need a deep dive to see how much stuff has actually been compromised. Now, there was, mission accomplished, we can say. The Houthis were destroyed. Yes, it was a mistake, but I would say that this was just slap on the wrist is what it deserves. It's not. We have bleed all the time in the agencies. It just happens, and this is not worth the problem. Yeah, it was a bad thing. Goldberg, I'll give him credit. He did the right thing by keeping it close to his chest until after the operation. But it is what it is, and I'm just wondering, are we going to get a deep dive into this as to how often this happens? How long has Signal been used? How much classified information, non-portion marked, has actually gone over it?
I actually think that's a great point. This is actually a wake-up call on several levels. I think certainly this calls for a review of the use of Signal and other possible messaging apps, and maybe also just the fact that security procedures writ large need to be improved, and certainly our leadership should be following the appropriate security procedures.
Ron is in Berrien Springs, Michigan, on our line for Democrats. Good morning, Ron.
Good morning. I think this was a setup by the Trump administration to try and take down Atlantic magazine and the reporters, Mr. Goldberg in particular, because he has been a spur in their saddlebag, and they were going to take down the magazine, destroy it, take it over, and this is all planned by the and it was also probably planned through Putin and his administration also, because you destroyed the coverage of this corrupt administration, this Russian Putin administration in D.C. right now, and when you no longer have any means to report on it, it's easier to install fascist imperialist martial law, plain and simple.
I think it's it can be tempting to come up with scenarios that to try to explain things. I think oftentimes the simple answer is actually the truth, and I think this is a situation of human error and poor judgment.
What do you think this incident will, or how do you think this incident will affect the willingness of U.S. allies to share sensitive information with the United States?
Well, we've already heard from the Israelis, the British, and concerns among other allies about sharing intelligence. The Israelis were outraged, understandably, because we actually relied on their intelligence for this operation. Presumably we were actually relying on human intelligence, which means that it could have put actual individuals in danger, and probably, obviously very valuable assets in danger, who I assume we would want to keep doing this work on the behalf of our national security interests. The Europeans already, there's a bigger context at play. They are already very concerned about many of the statements and actions of the Trump administration. And so the contents of the chat were certainly very damaging to an already tense relationship with our European allies.
You're referring to some of those statements within the chat that were disparaging directly
Correct.
of our European allies.
Correct, and statements about saying that we will bill the Europeans for this operation, also Egypt for this operation, and also an important ally in the Middle East. We rely on these allies for intelligence that we can't necessarily get ourselves. They have other means and other sources that we don't have. Hearing from the British especially is very concerning because we have a special relationship with the British. We have something called Five Eyes, and this is essentially the English-speaking countries of the world. And for the British to be doubting our reliability is a pretty serious concern.
Kent is in Muskegon, Michigan, on our line for Independence. Good morning, Kent.
Yes, good morning. And what I was taken aback by in the conversation is the childishness nature of the conversation. I mean, you think of this as being high school or maybe even middle school talk. I wish you could comment on that. Thank you.
Well, certainly, I think I would refer you to, there was a great editorial in the Wall Street Journal. Peggy Noonan wrote about this and actually expressed a similar concern. I think, I think it's a reminder to folks that that anything you write could be shared. And, I think, a long time ago, back when it was just email, I remember a friend who had worked at the Department of Justice referring to email as evidence mail. Now I think it's beyond email. It's now we have these chat apps, and I think the same rule applies.
We have a couple of questions we received via text and social media. James in Alexandria, Virginia says, I have over 22 years of U.S. Army air defense experience, and if we had sent a message of an active military engagement without it being classified or over an unclassified device applications, an officer could lose his commission and be put out of the Army immediately.
That's exactly right. And I think this comes back to a question of leadership and morale within the Pentagon. I think it's hard to ask people to follow rules that you are not following yourself.
Another question via text from Steve in Tampa, Florida. Jeffrey Goldberg did the wrong thing. If he was an American patriot, he would have contacted the Defense Department and the White House and said, I'm on a chat that I think I shouldn't be on, and I'm hearing things I shouldn't be hearing. I think you ought to check things out rather than publicizing it to promote the Democratic point of view to bring down President Trump.
This is a very interesting point of discussion. I mean, obviously, he has been highly criticized by the Trump administration for this very reason. If I were in his shoes, I think, I'm not sure which direction I would have gone in. I think the mistake that the administration made was to go after him right away, and then saying it's not classified information essentially kind of forced the Atlantic to publish the second story. And so, I think that's certainly a very debatable question. But typically, with the First Amendment and saying that it's unclassified information, I don't think that there will be legal action against the Atlantic.
Another text from Jeff in Dearborn, Michigan. Why was the February 2025 notification not to use Signal, as it had been compromised by the Russians, ignored? Why was Trump not included in the group chat?
Like, why was President Trump not included?
Yes.
That's a great question. I mean, look, I think in every administration, the senior team, it looks to me like the senior team, first of all, the chat was created originally to coordinate. So you don't include a president of the United States in a chat that is intended to coordinate making people aware of emails on their classified system. So
and I'll just pause you for a moment to give some clarity about this notification not to use Signal. Here's an article from CBS News that was published in a couple of days ago, but the NSA warned of vulnerabilities in Signal app a month before the Houthi strike chat. The National Security Agency sent out an operational security special bulletin to its employees in February of 2025, warning them of vulnerabilities in using the encrypted messaging application Signal, according to internal NSA documents obtained by CBS News. News of the NSA bulletin comes amid the continued fallout from an explosive article published Monday in The Atlantic. The publication's editor-in-chief Jeffrey Goldberg detailed how Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth inadvertently disclosed war plans to him in an encrypted Signal chat group. So this alert came out in February, and so this is what Jeff is asking about: why was that ignored?
I think that's a question that will have to be reviewed in the forthcoming investigations into this matter. Certainly the warning. I also saw something even from Google about this in February of 2025. And the reason the Russians have been focused on Signal is that the Ukrainians have been using it, and so they've been working very hard to crack Signal communications.
Dave is in Little Neck, New York, on our line for Republicans. Good morning, Dave.
Hey, good morning. Thanks for having me on. I've called a few times, and I'm glad I got a chance to express my my thoughts. I want to preface my conversation here with the fact that all of you have heard about the famous Anthony Blinken letter. 51 national security experts, you know who they are, Panetta, etc., signed a letter saying that the famous Hunter laptop had all these inklings of Russian disinformation. That was proven untrue. I hope you guys can admit that and agree with that.
Look, it was proven to be untrue, although at the same time, two things can be true at the same time. It did actually look like Russian disinformation at that time. So I don't fault people who viewed it that way or interpreted it that way. I think, all I have to say is that, this came to light, which is important. And I think it's obviously important to be cautious with information that's out there. But I think, in fairness to the people who signed the letter, I can understand why they may have thought that at the time.
James is in Atlanta, Georgia, on our line for Democrats. Good morning, James. James, go ahead. Okay, well, let's try Eric in Australia on our line for Independence. Good morning, Eric. Or I guess it's probably not morning there.
No, it's not nearly midnight. When I first heard about this, I thought, oh, okay, Mike has just accidentally added in a name on his contact list, and it's just a mistake.
Okay, so how is this story playing out in Australia in terms of the national security implications, or how the Australians are viewing their, relationship with the United States?
Well, I don't really think too many people here care about it because, we're used to England and MI6 leaking all sorts of information. We had a person who worked for Five Eyes left some secret information on a bus with his lunch when he was going home one day and forgot it. So I don't think it's that big a deal. But I find it interesting that you have this Mike Waltz, who's been in various positions for a long time, seems to know how to keep his mouth shut, and then you hear that there was a leak, so you think he just accidentally added somebody from his contact list, and a bit embarrassing, but it happens. But then you find out, well, hang on, he's never even spoken to this person. How on earth would this person be in his contact list? And then you find out that this person, Goldberg, is under a different name. And then you find out that Mike didn't even set up the contact list, or the phone in the contact list was given to him by somebody within the department. And then you start thinking, well, how far into the swamp do you go before you find the person who actually put this phone number, and not just some random person, some other bureaucrat or some other person in the cabinet. It happens to be a very anti-Trump journalist, probably one of the biggest in the country.
So Eric, there's a message that we received via Twitter that is along similar lines. We've heard a couple of callers reference whether or not there's some broader strategy behind this. J.D. Redding kind of counters that by saying, if a deep state wanted to conceal actions, why use a commercial app prone to human error, like adding a journalist, when classified systems like SIPRNet or JWICS are readily available to senior officials? Martha, maybe you could just respond broadly to the fact that we are hearing from so many people this morning about ideas that maybe there was a plan behind all of this.
I firmly believe that this is human error. I think that, I don't know how many people have made mistakes by, you send a text to somebody and maybe you think it's your spouse and it's actually your colleague. And I think a lot of people have made this mistake in their daily lives. This is actually, in my opinion, more to the point of you shouldn't be using Signal, right? I think that in situations like this, it's not unusual to, for people to really ponder, could there have been this or that? And I think that's a human instinct to explore, various possibilities. But I still come back to the point that the simple answer is often the answer.
Peter is in Madison, Wisconsin, on our line for Democrats. Good morning, Peter.
Hello. Can you tell me if a CIA agent was compromised in the Signal chat process here?
No. My understanding is no. But I think the hard part with Signal is that it's encrypted until it arrives in someone's phone, and unless you know that your phone is not compromised, you just don't know. Because it's encrypted until it's in text on another device. That being said, this name was not included in the Atlantic article, and the CIA director did point out this person was not a covert, intel officer. I think it's more that, so people who are analysts, for example, don't hide the fact that they work there necessarily. But I think I think we don't really know the details quite yet, and I think that'll be part of what's under review.
Kevin is in Erie, Pennsylvania, on our line for Republicans. Good morning, Kevin.
Hi, good morning. This question, I guess, is for Martha. I don't really...
It's a little hard to hear you, Kevin. Can you speak up a bit, please?
I'm sorry. Is this any better?
Yes, it's a bit better.
whose responsibility is it to make sure that their contacts are correct? Does each individual person's contacts for this Signal app differ? Does each person need to verify who is in their contacts? How does that work?
I think this is a very interesting question, and I think, first and foremost, the person who creates a chat is largely responsible for ensuring that they have the correct people in the chat that they've created. I think at the same time, prior to sharing views and information on a chat, it's really important to know who you are communicating with. So in a way, for anybody who chimed in that discussion, really just on a baseline responsibility level should have been checking to see who exactly was on the call or on the chat.
Well, that's all the time that we have for this segment. Thank you so much, Martha Miller, who is the National Security Institute Deputy Executive Director at George Mason University Law School, as well as for a former Special Assistant to President George W. Bush. We appreciate your time this morning.
Thank you.